probably think that you have no idea what I'm about to talk about. And that's just fine because I don't either. I do in a way. This is something that's interested me for a long time, and it's really about what I think of as kind of the liminal moment in the Christian liturgy, in a way. And it's about the beginning of the Holy Saturday liturgy. Some of you were here, I'm sure, for Holy Saturday, and you remember how it begins in darkness with a candle being brought in, and that candle blessed and so forth. It's the moment. But anyway, and the candle is blessed in the tradition by a deacon. And it's the only time in the sort of traditional liturgy that a deacon performs a blessing. Nobody knows why. St. Jerome in the 6th century complained about deacons giving a blessing on Holy Saturday when they're not allowed to. It's a very interesting moment, and the blessing of the Paschal candle, which stands for all sorts of things, you know mostly what it stands for because it is announced at the beginning of the service, the light of Christ. Thanks be to God. And this is, you can think of all the things it stands for, the lighting of a single candle out of nothing. It's still done nowadays, but the main thing is to extinguish in your cathedral or monastery or whatever it is, extinguish every light there is. For us now, it's easy, you just flip the switch or you pull the electric thing up. But if you put out all the lights, you are in the dark. And then, in this darkness, you create new light. Either, sometimes they did the service in the late afternoon and they would do it with a magnifying glass. You know how you focus a magnifying glass and get a little something, or by striking with a flint. But the basic idea is you create light out of nothing. And from that one little spark comes the flame of the candle, and from the flame of the candle comes all of the light for the monastery or the cathedral for all the rest of the year until next Holy Saturday when they're all put out again. So by liminal, it's stepping across the threshold of one thing into another. It's the key moment of transition, it seems to me, of all sorts of things. Of course, what are God's first words in the Bible?
There be light.
Oh, yeah. And of course, it stands for the resurrection. The symbolism of darkness and light stands for all sorts of things. And Easter itself is an enormously complicated thing because, well, it's lots of things, but the early Christians sometimes liked to mark Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness when he's tempted by the devil and that sort of thing before he begins his ministry. They used to mark that by having a similar kind of fasting period. And we still do that. We call it Lent. But it's not, but that part, imitating those 40 days is not really related to Easter. It's really related to the beginning, Jesus' preparation for his own ministry. And then, at a later time in sort of liturgical history, people begin to historicize things. They begin to say, why don't we mark Easter? Of course, has always been marked. Why don't we also mark the events leading up to Easter? Why don't we mark Good Friday? Why don't we mark Holy Thursday? Why don't we mark Palm Sunday? And so, in addition to the 40 days that stand for being in the wilderness, there's this part at the end that is also the historicization of the last days of Jesus' ministry on earth and his crucifixion and resurrection. And this is the resurrection moment, of course. But also, it's the moment of the creation of new life in the church, because that same Lenten period was used as a period of preparation and instruction for people who were going to be received into the church at this service on Holy Saturday. So baptism, this is one of the major times, one of two major times in the early church when Christians were baptized. Starting from the time when only adult Christians were baptized, and you had to go to a whole lot of classes and recite the creeds and the Ten Commandments and all that kind of thing. which I had to do to be confirmed and not to be baptized. But that kind of instruction, the catechumenate, and all the catechumens are baptized on Holy Saturday. They put on the white gown, the alb, and they wear that alb for a week. They put on, so they go from something to something white. And maybe you know, anybody know the Phantom of the Opera? What's the name of the guy in the Phantom of the Opera? No, maybe he's the Hunchback of Notre Dame. What's his name? Quasimodo? Do you know why he's called Quasimodo? Well, the Sunday after Easter is called Domenica in albis depositis. And people just say usually Domenica in albis, but for centuries it was called the Sunday on which you put off your white robes. So the newly baptized people were baptized in the Holy Saturday service. They wore their alb to show that they were brand new creations for a week, and they took them off on the Sunday that you put down your albs. And the entrance song for the Sunday after Easter, Quasimodo geniti infantes, just like newborn children. Quasimodo is not somebody's name, it's the first word, and in Latin countries, Italy, Spain, France, they still call it Quasimodo Sunday. And a lot of other Sundays, there are plenty of other Sundays that are named for their Latin introit, but that's another talk. Anyhow, so this service on Holy Saturday is really, really complicated, and it has many, many meanings. But if we just think of what the meanings there might be of just striking this light, this liminal moment, it's the resurrection, it's darkness and light, it's baptism into new life, it's springtime. You know, the new life that arises from the earth at about this time of year. Everybody knows, maybe you don't know, but the famous Latin hymn of a guy named Venantius Fortunatus that's, Salve festa dies toto venerabilis evo, you know that. Well, you do, you actually know two English translations of it. One of the English translations is, Hail the festival day, blessed day that art hallowed, and the other one is, Welcome, come ye faithful, raise the strain of triumphant glad. Do you know that one? Both of them talk about springtime. Now the queen of seasons bright, with the day of splendor. It talks about spring. And the Hail the festival day. Lo, the fair beauty of earth, from the death of the winter arising. They're both. Get your hymnal out and look at Welcome Happy Morning and Hail the Festival Day, the Easter, and you'll see that they're actually different English translations of the same sentiment, and it really is about springtime symbolizes for us the new life of the newly baptized and the resurrection of Christ and the new start that we all have. And all of that happens from striking that flint. And then you light a light. In some cases, it's the big Easter candle, the way we do it. In some cases, you light a smaller candle so you can carry it, because the Easter candle would need 4 or 5 people to carry it. And then you light the Easter. Anyway, that happens, and it's brought in, and you sing the light of Christ. But here on the screen, which nobody can see, and I'm sorry about that, but if you want to, at the end, you can come up and I'll flip through all the pictures so you can see what you were trying to look at. This is a 13th century manuscript made for Cardinal Stefaneschi, who was the master of ceremonies of St. Peter's Basilica in the 13th century. And it's the song that you sing for the blessing of the Paschal candle. Benedictio cerei Paschalis in Sabbato Sancto incipit. The beginning of the blessing of the Paschal candle on Holy Saturday. And here is a picture. Well, there's a nice picture of the resurrection, which I'm sure you can see. Here's Jesus emerging from his tomb, and here are the Marys talking to the angel who's describing the empty tomb. I can show you a slightly bigger version of the picture at the top on the right, because this presumably shows us the picture of the pulpit of Old St. Peter's, not the St. Peter's Basilica that we know now, but the Romanesque and much older basilica that stood there before. And there's the deacon up at the top with his two assistants, and there's a big Paschal candlestick standing on the floor with a candle on it. Anyway, and as it goes through this, we heard there's this very long blessing that's sung. And we call it the Exultet, the same way we say Quasimodo Sunday. We just name it for its first word. Exultet iam angelica turba celorum. Rejoice, heavenly choirs of angels. And maybe we heard it, those of you who were here on Holy Saturday, heard it sung very, very nicely by a member of the choir whom I'd like to congratulate, but I don't know her. But it was really nicely done. But it goes, Exultet iam angelica turba celorum. Exultet angela divina mysteria, et pro tanti regis victoria, turba intonet salutaris. And it goes on and on and on and on. And while I'm boring you otherwise, I brought some copies of an English translation. Maybe could somebody help me pass these out? Yeah, thank you. Some copies of an English translation of what you sing. And when you get it, we'll talk about it a little bit. But continuing this manuscript, it goes on. It's a very long song. But this has some fun pictures in it. On the later page, it shows that on the left-hand side here is the whole page, and on the right is an enlargement, which I'm sure you can't see, of what's going on at this point. Here 5 grains of incense are put in by the deacon in the thing as in the shape of a cross. So you make a shape of a cross and you put 5 grains of incense representing the 5 wounds of Christ. And in this case, you do it in the course of the blessing. We now do it before we come into the church. And here's another picture where they're lighting the Paschal candle itself. Maybe you can see that the main candle is here on a huge curlicue candle stand. And nobody knows why, but there's a funny pitchfork, a kind of three-pronged thingy-dingy with lights on it. And you use, maybe because they want to make sure that nobody blows it out. But anyway, then you light the Paschal candle at this point where the text talks about even though the light be divided and subdivided, it remains one. Divisos in partes, even when it's divided. And that's the moment where you divide the light. You take the light that you brought in and you light the Paschal candle, and now you have 2 lights. And then, of course, it's spread out to everybody. And later on, there's a picture of, this is where, after this, then you light all, at this point, the deacon is still singing, it's going to be a long service. It says, Hic accenduntur lampae. Here, the lamps are lit.
I have to go and tell that someone that she did a great job according to you.
Please do. Y'all sing pretty here. And so here's somebody down underneath lighting the lamps that are hanging in the church. So now we light the church. We do a lot of that. We stand in that very, very, very long tradition. So here's the text. The only way I could fit it on one piece of paper was to make it so small that nobody can read it. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But what you have here is the version from our prayer book. Starting at the top. We don't sing Lumen Christi, of course, but starting with Rejoice Now, if you have that side of the page. All that down to where it says medieval version is the version that we have in our prayer book. With a few changes that I've made, where the text is italic, I have presumed to change what it says in the prayer book to something that's a little bit closer to what it actually says in the original Latin. But in any case, this is what we sing. And there where it says medieval version, the part at the beginning that says, Rejoice now, heavenly hosts, that's Exultet jam angelica turba celorum. That part, all the way down to the Lord be with you, stays the same. That's the same in several different versions of the Exultet. Then where it says modern version, instead what these people in St. Peter's and everybody else in Latin, in the Latin West, up until the Reformation, are singing this opening part down to the Lord be with you, and then the preface, then the medieval version, they sing all of this. All of this. So it's about, what would you say? 4, 5, 6 times longer than the one we use in our prayer book. It's very nicely done. It's a summary, in a way, it's a summary of all the things that happen. I have divided the text into sort of paragraphs with labels that I put on it that are not there, and then where it says, you know, the night, or wonders, or the flame, and the bees, and one more night, and the morning star, and so forth. The sort of themes of the next section of text as I read it. Those things are not part of the medieval tradition, of course, but because it's so long. But some of the things to think about are what this candle symbolizes. And that's what this long song is really about. And we hear it in our own version of the Exultet. What night is this? This is the night when Christ rises from the dead. This is the night when people... But also we think about important nights in history. The nights that the night that the Egyptians were told to be ready and to put the blood of a lamb on their doorpost. The night that the children of Israel were led through the Red Sea on dry land, led by a pillar of fire. And, you know, a whole lot of things saying, this is the night when Christ broke the bonds of death, the night when all who believe in Christ are delivered from sin, and so forth. So there's a lot of good stuff. And calling into the present the kind of salvation history, the things that are night, and the light that enlightens a night, the things that a thinking person, a thinking Christian would think of, that lead up to this night of all nights. And then you get carried away, and you talk about the flame, you know, the hands of the flame. Even though it's divided into parts, it knows no diminution of the flame. I mean, flame is pretty amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's not a thing, is it? At least in science class, they kept saying flame is not a thing. It's something happening. It's a chemical reaction. But anyway, you have this one flame, and from it you can make 50,000 flames, all the same, without any loss of anything. I mean, we're used to that, but it's pretty remarkable, actually. You know, and that's our attention is called to that here. Even though it be divided into parts, yet there's no diminution of the divided flame. Nourished by the melting wax, and then we get the wonderful praise of the bees. Medieval poets are wonderful, but they're not necessarily good entomologists. They describe how the bees make this magnificent wax. And when you think of, I mean, bees are almost as remarkable as flame, aren't they? You know? I mean, bees are really something else. But some of this stuff gets along pretty far. We'll read the bee stuff. Though she may be tiny in the smallness of her body, she revolves prodigious knowledge in her tiny breast. Weak in force, but forceful in abilities. That ought to be the theme song of the women's movement, shouldn't it? But they scatter, they gather blossoms with their mouth, and burdened with their provision, turn the flowers into wax, mold the newborn with their mouth. Did you know that? Others seal up the nectar. Truly marvelous bee, now this is the hard part, whose sex is not violated by the male, nor shattered by childbearing, neither do children destroy her chastity. Somehow, medieval monks all knew that bees give birth without ever any kind of connection with a male bee. Because they never saw a male bee, you know. Anyway, just as Mary conceived as a virgin, gave birth as a virgin, and remained a virgin. So they, in a way, are a model for the Virgin Mary. That's just what it says here. And so forth. Beautiful things about the morning star, Christ the morning star. May the morning star, and then stars is another amazing kind of light, and the morning star is something that exists in the book of Psalms. You know, the morning stars sang together. That's not in the Psalms, but anyway, and the morning star that we sing about in O Come, Emmanuel. Anyway, the rising star, the single star in the sky, in many poetic moments represents Christ. So when we say the morning star here, we say, may the morning star find its flame burning. That it not only shouldn't it burn all night, but may Christ recognize the flame of our faith. May our faith still be burning when Christ, the morning star, arises. And then you make sure that you call down God's blessing on the bishop. He might be sitting right there. And on all the clergy and on all the people. And on the king and emperor and the local prince and anybody else. And I think, nobody says this, but I think the donors. And on those who offer you this sacrifice of praise, may you bestow eternal rewards. Like, you know, this is the Dow Chemical Paschal candle or something like that. That you might have a corporate sponsor or whatever the medieval analog of a corporate sponsor is. I'm not quite sure. But in any case, you make sure everybody gets included. It's a very, very, very long song. And it looks as though there was a time. Here is, I'm sorry, you can't see him. Everybody will know this is St. Jerome. There are two ways of recognizing St. Jerome. One is he's either entirely nude out in the desert. He's being a penitent and living alone in the desert in the Holy Land. But here he's being shown as the translator of the Bible. St. Jerome, but you can't see his pet lion here. When he was out in the desert, he was it a thorn? Anyway, he helped a wounded lion, and the lion kept being his friend for the rest of his life. And he's sitting right down here. He looks kind of like a dog, but that's actually a lion. And here are all his books, and here's time running out, you know, we got to get going. Jerome is famous for many, many things, but also for being the creator of the Latin Bible, translating the Hebrew and the Greek into the what we call the Vulgate Bible. And he actually did do that, and he translated the Psalms 2 different times, because then he said, well, yeah, but I was doing the Greek thing. Now I'm going to do the Hebrew version because it's probably more authentic. So he was a very good scholar. Why is he talking about St. Jerome in the middle of something about the Exultet, you might ask? Let me tell you why I'm talking about St. Jerome in the middle. So, we have a letter from St. Jerome in the 6th century in which a guy named Praesidius apparently has written to him to ask whether he, Jerome, would help him in making up his blessing of the Paschal candle this year. That's interesting. Because one of the things that says is it was customary in the 6th century to make it up, or to pretend to be making it up. That is, that this, which we find in all, well, not quite, but in thousands of medieval manuscripts, this was not once the thing you do. Once upon a time, you went up into the pulpit and did something. You did a blessing of the Paschal candle. It's like doing a sermon or something. And so this guy, Praesidius, apparently has written to St. Jerome to say, I need help. What do I do about my Easter candle blessing? So we have the letter from St. Jerome back to him. And he said, oh, no, don't count on me. First of all, I don't approve of this. He's the guy who says, I don't see why deacons should be allowed to bless anything, anytime. That's not what deacons do. Deacons assist, priests bless. No. Plus, I don't like the way people do it. And he goes on and he talks about the things people do. They talk about the flowers. They talk about the bees. They talk about things that don't really have much to do with blessing the candle or whatever. No, he said, no, I won't. That's all he says. But it's really interesting. The idea that the bees have always been part of this blessing. I mean, if you're standing here thinking, okay, I got a candle, and I got to sing about this candle. Everything I can think of about the flame, I've already done. And as too short, well, I guess I better do the candle. So then you started on the candle and the wax and how it, there's nothing left over when it's burned, and there's no residue, and then the wax itself, and where does the wax come from, and so on. We have, as it turns out, we also have other evidence that the blessing of the Paschal candle was not always a fixed text. We have that from the fact that there survived from the early Middle Ages several different versions. The version that I've shown you is what became the standard version of the Latin West. But there are other versions. There are 3 versions that all have the same beginning part. They all begin, Exultet bacelorum. They all begin with that same beginning. But then once it gets to the Lord be with you and you lift up your hearts, that whole long second part is different in three different texts that we have. One, the standard kind of Roman one that you have the translation for here. Then there's one from southern Italy, from the Beneventan liturgy, as it's called. The Latin Church of southern Italy has one that starts the same but goes differently. And the Ambrosian Church, there's a separate liturgy in the area around Milan in northern Italy. The Ambrosian Church has another one that begins with the same opening passage but has a different continuation. And it's really interesting to compare all 3, because you can see that it's 3 poets or whatever they are, creators, all vamping on the same basic subjects. You know, the flame, the historical significance of this night, the magic of the light, the column, the wax, long thing about the bees, and then the invocation of authorities and stuff like that. So there apparently was a pattern that you follow. You need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you end this way. But there must have been a time when people went up into the pulpit, which is apparently where you do this, and just made it up. Maybe following a little index card that said, don't forget the bees, don't forget the bishop, or whatever the things are. We're not sure. But the fact that we have these 3 different versions, and then some other places, we have some other blessings of the Easter candle. In the old liturgy of Spain, before the Mohammedans ran all the Christians out, we have some old manuscripts that have yet another blessing, and so on. So it's a complicated business. But this is kind of the standard version, and it has been fixed from the earliest manuscripts we have. It's just the fact that we have different versions in different places that make us think that there was once a time when it was much more fluid. But by now, it's pretty fixed. I'd like to talk with you a little bit about, you may be wondering about this thing hanging off the music stand. This is a very famous kind of thing. In southern Italy and also in Milan, although we don't have any examples from Milan, and in Milan they were not illustrated. In southern Italy, it was customary in major churches to write the Exultet, the whole text and the music of the Exultet, on a scroll. And then the deacon goes up into the pulpit and sings the Exultet. And if you put pictures on the scroll, then I see the music here right side up, and you, in principle, see the pictures also right side up, because to me they're upside down. And if I go up high, very high in the pulpit, I don't know how long it takes. This is not a 12th century Exultet roll. This is the exact facsimile of a 12th century Exultet roll, and we'll talk about it and a lot of others at greater length next week if anybody comes. Well, I'll talk about it anyway. But that's what this is, and it's a wonderful idea. The idea that we here are looking up at this at a candle that's on a huge tall candlestick, at somebody singing way up there and gradually unrolling sort of pictures of salvation history in front of us as it's described in words and music. It's one of the world's first sort of multimedia experiences. You might call it a sort of medieval MTV or something. Taylor Swift, eat your heart out. So here's one of the places where scrolls like this were used. I've actually spent way more of my life than I probably should have thinking about this text and the places where it was sung, and in particular about this phenomenon, which I think is very cool. Art historians have been interested in these scrolls. There are 28 of these that survive to us. And they're all from southern Italy, except for one which was made in Pisa. And the one that was made in Pisa is made in imitation of one that is from southern Italy, but was taken to Pisa in the 12th century. So it's really a South Italian phenomenon originally, connected with that South Italian liturgy. Anyway, but art historians have been fascinated by these for a long time for all sorts of reasons. One is they're some of the biggest paintings on vellum, on parchment that survive. They're not, books don't come much bigger than this, and some of these pictures are very large. There are a lot of them, and some of them are very, very beautiful, and so of course they're of interest to art historians. The trouble is, generally speaking, for a long time art historians had no idea what they were looking at. They just looked at the pictures, but they didn't know what the Exultet was. They didn't even mention half the time that the words and the music are upside down with respect to the pictures. And sometimes they couldn't tell whether the music was right side up or upside down anyway. And so I spent a lot of time figuring out the stuff that the art historians didn't pay any attention to, and I actually wrote a book really designed for the art historians to understand what they've been talking about for several generations. Anyhow, I love these things, and they're really terrific. And here's one of the places, you can imagine that it's part of a much larger kind of concept, and you may have seen pictures of or visited early medieval churches that have the kind of church furniture that we know was very often present in churches, but doesn't survive much anymore. One of the old kinds of church, like 10th, 11th, 12th century, is to have a kind of chancel, not a chancel rail, but sort of an enclosure, a railed enclosure with two great big pulpits, one on each side, usually an apse at the far end with a throne in the middle of the apse where the presider sits. And that kind of arrangement works in lots of places. Here is the entrance to the courtyard, the atrium of Salerno Cathedral. Salerno is a city on the coast south of Naples. And this church, you can see just the facade of the church in the far end of the courtyard. This church was built by a bishop of Salerno in the 12th century. In the early 12th century, he had been a monk of Monte Cassino, the great mother house of Benedictine monasticism. And he built the church of Salerno to be an imitation of the Basilica of Monte Cassino. Since that time, Monte Cassino has been destroyed more than once. And we don't really know what the great Basilica of Abbot Desiderius of Monte Cassino looked like. The closest we're ever going to get is to visit Salerno Cathedral. And I'm going there early next month to speak and have somebody sing the Exultet from the 12th century pulpit of Salerno, and you all might like to come. But anyway, here's when you go in there, there's the courtyard, there's the great big tower. You can see the kind of Moorish influence maybe in the nature of the arches and that kind of thing. And here's the church itself as you face it. Not all that imposing, but it does have the look of, well, it has the look of a standard medieval basilica. And inside, it's a mess. Because there are those not very pretty organ pipes on both sides. In this triumphal arch here, there are the remains of a very large and very beautiful 12th century mosaic, most of which has been restored. Those little black blobs are actually very beautiful mosaic. But one of the things you can see is that there survive two big ambos, ambones, pulpits, one on this side and one on this side, and also bits of the enclosure, of the choir enclosure that once probably stood in different places. I've been to all of the places in southern Italy where an Exultet roll came from. And there's not a single church in which the original church furniture stands in the place where it originally stood when the Exultet roll was used there. There's no place where you can go and get an Exultet roll from the place and sing it from the pulpit that is from that place and is still in the place where it was. There is an Exultet roll at Salerno. There are original pulpits at Salerno. But the Exultet roll might not be from Salerno, and the pulpits have all been moved around and reconfigured. So, anyway, this is as good as we're going to do, and besides, they're very pretty. There's a great big pulpit on the right, and a not quite so big pulpit on the left. And they're really not so much for preaching. Even in cathedrals, there was not a lot of preaching on a Sunday morning. You read the epistle from one and the gospel from another, and certain other kinds of readings. Here's the big one, and there's the big Paschal candlestick. I don't know if you can see it. It has a ugly bunch of flowers on the top here. But look at the size of this column. It's not likely that you're going to be able to come in procession with a candle that, well, I guess you could carry it up there and put it in there, but more likely is you're going to light the candle once you're up there from something else. So there's that big pulpit. It has a reading desk facing the center. It has quite remarkable sculpture of some kind of a atlas, some kind of a caricature of a man with an eagle, a sort of St. John Evangelist eagle. We're used to seeing eagles. Lots to be said about these sculptures and this beautiful cosmatic gold tesseras, mosaic decoration all over all of these things. There's another picture of the sculpture, and that's the look of the smaller pulpit, which has it has a little projecting reading desk or something, but it doesn't have a lectern. I mean, it doesn't have a place to put a book. Maybe it once did, but it's very handsome with the same kind of decoration. There are evangelists and prophets, but there are not 4 evangelists. There are only 2. So it's clear that pieces have been moved around and reconfigured, but nobody's sure how. Underneath here is a very interesting little relief sculpture that looks like that. And the art historians, they are also smart. They have no idea what this is. Some people say it looks like the representations of the ocean that you see in old Roman sculptures, except that the representation of the ocean has crab claws sticking out the top. And somebody called it it's the sun. Some people call it a sculpture that looks like an old man. One art historian called it abyssus, the abyss, because that's the word that comes in the Bible when the way we have it in English is the face of the Lord moved over the deep. Not before, and then God said, "Let there be light." Well, when the face of the Lord moved over the deep, I said deep, I don't know what it's in the King James Version. The word in the Latin, the face of the Lord moved over the abyssus. And so, if you read the first reading on Holy Saturday of the 12 readings that follow the Exultet, the first one is, "In the beginning God created heaven and the earth, and the face of the Lord moved over the deep." And if you're standing on top of this thing, reading that, I don't know. It's a wonderful idea. Nobody will ever be able to prove it, but it's right under here. And this is not the only place where it happens. Anyhow, there are lots and lots of really cool pulpits. Here's one in Ravello. You ever been to Ravello up above Amalfi? There's a church there, a little cathedral, and it has 2 pulpits. This one has Jonah being swallowed on the right-hand side, and then being ejected from the sea monster on the left-hand side. His legs are sticking out on the right, and his head is coming out on the left. And Jonah, of course, is a symbol of resurrection, like so many other things. It's maybe a suitable thing to have on a pulpit that you will use on Holy Saturday. What's this? Oh yeah, this is the Church of San Clemente in Rome, which is one of the few places where you can see a whole set of ecclesiastical furniture of this kind, with the chancel railing, 2 pulpits, a giant Paschal candlestick, an axe, freestanding altar, and a throne behind. But even in San Clemente, it's kind of a reconstruction of pieces that were found in various parts of the church. This is the giant Paschal candlestick at St. Paul's outside the walls, a great big basilica in Rome. You can't see it very well. You have no idea. That's about 16 or 17 feet high. You know, it's almost as tall as this room. It's very, very, very big and very, very sculpted. And so, there are these Exultet scrolls, and I would like to talk a little bit more about them next time, but a quick tour of what these things are. The basic idea is, here's the words, Exultet iam angelica turba celorum, and there's the music. So I sing it, and that E is right side up for me, and on this one too. The E is right side up because it's part of my singing. See the E? But the pictures, the rest of the pictures here are upside down, including right here. Here's a picture of the bishop lighting the candle while the deacon is up here on the pulpit. You get a lot of pictures in these scrolls. Well, what is depicted in these scrolls? A lot of times, the ceremony itself. Here's a deacon standing really sort of on a platform. This is the oldest Exultet scroll from the 10th century, and it suggests that in the very earliest versions, the deacon didn't go up into a big high pulpit, but did something from down on the floor, as here or as in that picture. Anyhow, in a lot of them, we see pictures of the ceremony. Here's one which shows, you can't see it very well, but this is a very detailed picture of the pulpit. And it may be a detailed picture of the famous wooden pulpit in the new Basilica of Desiderius at Monte Cassino, because this scroll was made at and for Monte Cassino. Since that pulpit has been destroyed and the whole basilica has been destroyed, this may be a historical record of considerable importance. It's another matter, but anyhow. And here again is one of those great big giant candlesticks. You've got to have a thingy dingy that's very long. I was trying to get to the one, yeah, this. I want you to note, you probably can't see this. Here's the guy singing the Light of Christ, Lumen Christi. Here's the eagle. Here's Jonah coming out of the whale and going into the whale. I don't know if you can see that. We'll leave this up, come up. And then down, there's all these panels decorated here. And underneath here is a funny head with her hair sticking out all around. I don't know if you can see that, but come up and have. Here's a picture underneath the ambo of that thing that we saw in Salerno Cathedral. Whatever it is. They weren't making it up at Salerno. It seems to be something sort of traditional for this kind of thing. Anyhow, lots and lots of pictures of the ceremony itself in these scrolls. But there's other stuff too. There are pictures that bring into the present historical events. You will know what this one is. There's Pharaoh and his chariots and his chariot drivers. Anybody who was here on Saturday knows that it goes and goes. Chariots and his chariot drivers. There they all are down in the middle of the Red Sea, and there are the children of Israel being led by a column of fire. Here's another interpretation of the Red Sea. It's fun to draw chariots and then just scribble over top with water. Here's a picture of what they call the harrowing of hell. The tradition is that in the time that Jesus lay in the tomb, he visited the underworld and limbo and brought out certain Old Testament characters like Adam and Eve. There's a section which some people later crossed out of the Exultet. Some churches don't use it, about how necessary the sin of Adam is so that we would need a Redeemer and have one in Christ. O certe necessarium ad Anyway, I'm not a theologian, but some people, anyway, there's a section about Adam's sin, and there it is. There's also Rejoice Now, Mother Church. How do you draw a picture of Mother Church? Well, you draw a picture of Mother Church sitting on a church with seven candlesticks. This seems to be, yeah. And there are lots of pictures of Rejoice Now, Mother Church, using this same kind of image. There's Adam and Eve being chased out of the garden at the top, and down below that it is talking about. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is the night in which the true Paschal lamb is sacrificed, in which the children of Israel made sacrifice and they're putting the blood on the doorposts in Egypt so that the angel of death will pass over them. And then there's the bees. Lots and lots and lots of pictures of bees. You could probably write a medieval treatise on beekeeping from the pictures in medieval Exultet rolls if you believed what you saw. But a lot of these people are monks, and I'm sure they're very devout people, and they're really good at praying. They're not so good at remembering what bees look like. Almost all of the illustrators think that bees have the stinger on the front, not the back, among other things. But you could think of a lot about medieval beehives. You can tell these are pictures about beekeeping. There's a candle being lit, and there's a whole lot of bees and a lot of flowers. And they all have little pointy heads. And then there's the place at the end where you call God's blessing on all the authorities and so forth. Here's the Pope in his hairdryer up at the top. And then here's the bishop at his right. And then here's the emperor in his wedding cake, and with all of his army, which are often mentioned. So we call God's blessing down on everybody. Here's another picture of the king and his retinue. And another picture of another king and his retinue. Somebody looks like he has made himself a paper hat out of a newspaper. These things are all ways of bringing all of salvation history into the present, in a way, and sort of gathering all things into one for this. I mean, I think we all can agree that this moment of striking new fire, lighting a candle, and from that candle expanding the light to, symbolically, of course, the whole world, but the whole institution in which that single candle is lit, it brings all of human experience and all of divine experience. It's the night when heaven and earth are joined together, as it says somewhere in that text. And so, although it's just one moment in a very, very, very long church service, if you did the whole medieval thing and then you had 12 long readings, several of which were followed by long songs called tracts, then you had the blessing of water, then you had the long baptism service, and then you had, anyway, this is just the beginning of something that's going to go on for a very long time. But it is at the center, it seems sort of spiritually, theologically, and also kind of chronologically in the course of the Christian year, at the center of everything we do, just striking that one little spark. And that's what engenders all this poetry, all these crazy long prayers and blessings, and all this beautiful art. We'll talk some more about these things next time, but I think I'll quit now. But I wonder if we have time. Would everybody like to just come up close and stand around in a circle, and I'll flip through the pictures again? Would that be a good idea? Anybody who wants to do that? Or should we have questions and stuff and then have people come? I don't know what you want to do. Anybody have any complaints or questions? Well, come on up and we'll just come look at the pictures. They're very nice. And thank you for coming.